Mr. Phillips, Dr. Parmar, Excellencies, fellow students, ladies and gentlemen. This function has sent me back 53 years, as you saw. And it is amazing how well my school education equipped me for my later life. Incidentally, I was in Cathedral throughout. So I have been in the junior school, middle school, thereafter co-ed, and then finally in the senior school. And the amazing thing was that when we grew up, we were a microcosm of this great country because we had Jews in our class, we had Anglo-Indians in our class, we had Muslims in our class, we had Hindus from all over the country. And nobody ever thought of a fellow student as either an Anglo-Indian, a Jew, or a Hindu. And this was till we passed out. We were all friends. In fact, our best friends, some of my best friends were from all the communities. And as I told you, it reflects this great country because this country has, in fact, given succor to the earliest Christians. We have the great apostle of Jesus himself, Thomas, who comes here, preaches, and is martyred here. So we have the Christian community of the South, right from the time of Jesus. We have Jews after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD by Titus, who came down to this country. I might tell you something amazing about the Jews. I went to Ahmedabad recently and went into their synagogue. And I was told by the Jewish priests there that in Israel, there is a little urn which contains the soil of Kerala. Now, why the soil of Kerala? Because this is where the Jews have remained for 2,000 years. What a tribute it is to our country. And that is, in fact, something that is kept in Israel as the only place in which the Jews have been undisturbed in their sojourn through history. We can also boast of the earliest Muslims coming here, Arab traders who came to the West Coast. My own people, the Parsis, came here in the 7th century and have lived and thrived in this great country. So what was nice was that our little class was reflective, really, a little microcosm of the nation itself. And this is, in fact, going to be the theme of today's talk. Because I want to remind everybody here that the single most important cardinal virtue of our Constitution is fraternity. And you've seen that I have gone through life. I left Bombay at a very early age. I went to Delhi. After that, I went to America, then came back and practiced here for a while, and then was in the Supreme Court throughout. But my retirement, which is the happiest phase of my life, incidentally, because judgeship was imprisonment which was not simple but rigorous. It was terrible. 7 years were very, very, very difficult. And in the last 4 years, I've got back to sanity. And having got back to sanity, have come out with 2 more books. The most recent is a book called An Ode to Fraternity, which is the subject of today's talk. And in it, what I have done is to make my little contribution towards world peace. So, what I have done really began in my scripture class in school. Kuruvilla Jacob, who was our principal, a darling man, used to teach us scripture in the principal's office. And as you saw, I became a navar, that is a priest at a very young age, at the age of 12. And all that we were taught was to live in the Agyari, live by certain rules, and to finally spout on the 24th day of being in the Agyari before a large populace. Prayers, I think I spouted prayers by heart for some 3 hours without knowing what they meant. And Mr. Jacob having heard this, called me to the top of the class and asked me, come tell us what about your religion? You know, you're a priest there now. And I mumbled, fumbled, was able to say nothing. And from that day, I resolved that I would get to the bottom not only of my faith, but every single world religion. And that has been my trajectory since the age of 12. And I have been studying world religions ever since. And ultimately, the culmination of this study has been in this recent book, An Ode to Fraternity. Now, the object of the book is really set out in the introduction. And it refers to a rock edict of one of our two greatest emperors, Ashoka, the other being Akbar. And they were our greatest emperors because both believed that in this land of diverse creeds and cultures, the only way in which we can peaceably coexist is to love one another. And we cannot love one another by being misinformed about one another. So, the 12th rock edict of Ashoka tells us that Piyadasi, beloved of the gods, that is Ashoka, tells his citizenry that I want all of you to be well informed of everybody else's faith. Because once you are informed, you will not denigrate others' faith, nor will you unduly praise your own. And this ultimately is the only thing that leads to a beautiful word, concord. He used a lovely word, concord. And it's in the spirit of that 12th rock edict that I wrote this book. Now, it is divided into, first, the monotheistic faiths, that is Zoroastrianism, followed by Judaism, followed by Christianity, followed by Islam, followed by Sikhism, and then Baha'ism. Then come the non-theistic faiths, Jainism, Buddhism, and the two great Chinese faiths, Confucianism, Taoism. And finally, of course, Hinduism, which cannot be pigeonholed. And Hinduism was, in many ways, the most interesting because it has strands of thought from everywhere, including its own. And finally, of course, the conclusion was what best to get from each faith so that one can live one's life in conformity with what is best. And also, despite the bewildering metaphysics and the differences in metaphysics, what is the bottom line? The bottom line is really an ethical line. By and large, it is, as you sow, so shall you reap. And being informed about other faiths is, according to me, the only way in which the Indian citizen can step forward in peace and harmony. This, in fact, is our constitution. And our constitutional values are contained largely in its great preamble. The preamble of the Constitution starts with "We, the people of India." Most important, because we are a diverse people with diverse creeds, diverse cultures. We've all got together. And we have given to ourselves this great Constitution. Now, what have we given ourselves? We say that we are going to make India into, number one, a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. What do we mean by these words? Why sovereign? Because now, at last, we are ruling ourselves. There's no other sovereign above us. Why socialist? Of course, these two words were added by the 42nd Amendment and have led to a lot of debate. But according to me, it makes not the least difference because socialism is inbuilt in the directive principles of state policy and secularism is inbuilt in the fundamental rights. It makes no difference as to whether you explicitly put it there or you don't put it there. So they're both there anyway. And we are democratic, meaning thereby that we rule ourselves, not directly but indirectly, by universal adult franchise. Very, very important. And therefore, the representative government can't last forever, but must keep changing periodically, and we've chosen 5 years as a long enough period. Why republic? Because we are no longer governed by a monarch. We are governed by an elected president. Elected, mind you, who is now head of state. The preamble then goes on to say that we must believe in justice, very, very important cardinal virtue. Social, economic, and political. Political justice was granted at the stroke of the midnight hour when the Constitution itself came into force. Because straight away, universal adult franchise became the basis of electing governments. Social and economic justice are nowhere near where they should be. And of course, hopefully, we will struggle to find some via media between the rich who are getting richer and the poor who are remaining where they are. So we have these great concepts, and then you have the war cry of the French Revolution, so to speak. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Liberty, again, is very important. Liberty is divided into two groups, thought and expression. And the second group, equally important, where not only do you have this liberty of thought and expression, but you have the liberty of faith, belief, and worship. Very important. Everybody, therefore, is free to worship in his own way. And after liberty, you have equality, which is equally important, because equality of status is something we were lacking. At a stroke, we introduced Article 17 and did away with untouchability, and equally threw open Hindu temples to all under Article 25. So we have equality of status and of opportunity, where a leg up is given to those who are underprivileged by the reservation policy contained both in government jobs as well as in educational institutions. And finally, we come to the greatest cardinal virtue of all, without which liberty and equality will not exist, which is fraternity. And fraternity assures two things. One, the dignity of the individual, most important. Each person has his own dignity in his own faith. And second, the unity and integrity of the country. Now, a fundamental duties chapter was added by the 42nd Amendment in 1976. Two of those duties reflect fraternity beautifully, because now the duty is of one citizen in his behavior to another. It's no longer citizen versus the state. So, the first duty is to see that there is harmony, very important. Unity of the country, harmony. And harmony is only if you transcend all barriers which are religious, social, etc., in order to achieve fraternity, or what is called common brotherhood in the fundamental duties chapter. And second, to remember that we are all citizens who value, cherish, and must preserve a composite culture. The word composite is very, very important. So when we see the Constitution, we find that this cardinal value of fraternity has been under siege. And it is important for us as a secular institution to lead the way in reformulating what this fraternity is. I must tell you that it is very, very important to try and go back, I don't know if it's utopian or otherwise, to my own school days. I don't believe, I'm a person who believes in hope. I don't believe that the clock has been turned back irreversibly. It is for you now to reverse it. And you heard our school hymn. The very first line of the second verse. Incidentally, I remember that school hymn. And I sang it along with all of you. And the very first line of that school hymn is very, very important. Father in heaven who lovest all. Remember, Father in heaven lovest all. We don't love each other, unfortunately. And the last line equally of the school, that you have equal love for all men neath the sun. So fraternity is inbuilt into our school hymn. Don't ever forget that when you leave. And when we sing our school anthem and we say, play up school, let it rip, let it thunder, etc., remember the refrain which keeps going: school first, house next, self last. Incidentally, I was Savage House. And after you get out of school, never forget, keep this up. But then as a citizen of India, you have to replace these words. And what will you say? Constitution first, Constitution second, self last. God bless you all. Thank you all very much.